What happens when a mother's love meets a cop's arrogance in the middle of a courtroom? The sound of that slap was so loud, it silenced the entire courtroom. Papers stopped rustling, chairs stopped creaking, even the judge's gavel froze midair. For a second, nobody moved. All eyes turned toward the woman standing at the center of it all. Danielle Mercer, her cheek red, her breathing heavy, her eyes locked on the man who'd just struck her. That man was Sergeant Mark Ellison, a uniformed officer who'd just done the unthinkable, right there, in front of a judge, lawyers, journalists, and a room full of witnesses. You could almost hear people's hearts pounding, like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Danielle didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, silent. And then, something in her shifted. Her posture straightened. Her eyes narrowed, calm but dangerous, like she was done being scared. Within a blink, she stepped forward, grabbed Ellison's arm, and flipped him over her shoulder. Clean, fast, controlled. The officer hit the ground with a thud that echoed through the courtroom. Gasps filled the air. The judge shouted, "Order! Order in the court!" But it was too late. The room had already erupted into chaos. Security rushed in. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. And through all the noise, Danielle just stood there, her hands trembling slightly, but her face composed. She didn't look like a woman who'd lost control. She looked like someone who'd finally taken it back. Minutes later, the bailiffs escorted both of them out. People whispered, phones were already recording, and you could feel it. This moment wasn't staying inside those walls. It was going to spread. The clip would be online within hours, dissected, argued about, shared, and replayed across every news outlet in the country. But before all that, before the headlines, the interviews, the hashtags, and the protests, there was just a mother. A woman who had come to court for one reason, to fight for her son's freedom. She didn't plan on fighting anyone else. And yet, here she was, standing at the center of a storm she never asked for. No one in that courtroom that day could have predicted what would happen next, or how one moment of disrespect would expose everything wrong with how power was used and abused in that room. But to understand why that slap happened, and why Danielle reacted the way she did, you have to go back to where it all started, to the days leading up to that hearing, to the life she lived before the world knew her name. Because the truth is, Danielle Mercer didn't become that woman in the courtroom overnight. She was made by every injustice, every long night, and every broken promise that came before. But how does an ordinary mother end up face to face with a police officer in a courtroom showdown that shakes the nation? Let's go back to the beginning. Before her name hit the news, before the cameras showed up outside her house, Danielle Mercer was just another mother trying to hold her life together. She lived in Columbus, Georgia, in a small brick duplex on a quiet street near the river. Her morning started before sunrise, coffee in one hand, work uniform in the other. She worked as a physical therapy assistant at a rehab center downtown, helping elderly patients relearn how to walk, stretch, and stand tall again. Funny thing was, she spent all day helping others get back on their feet, but her own life had been on shaky ground for years. Her son, Marcus, was 17. Smart kid, curious, soft-spoken, the kind of boy who preferred sketching faces in his notebook over hanging out in parking lots. His father wasn't around anymore. It was just the two of them, and that was enough for Danielle. They had this quiet rhythm, dinner together, late-night talks, music playing low in the background. But that rhythm broke the day Marcus got arrested. It started with a protest downtown, a peaceful one. People holding signs, chanting about accountability and fairness. Marcus had gone with a few friends from school, holding a sign that read, "Justice is not a favor." Danielle wasn't worried at first. Her son was cautious, respectful. He wasn't the kind to cause trouble. But that night, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was cold, official. "Ma'am, your son's been detained at the county jail. You'll need to come down." Her heart dropped. The drive to the station felt like forever. When she arrived, she found Marcus behind glass, eyes red, his hands trembling. "They said I resisted," he whispered, voice cracking. "But I didn't, Mama. I swear I didn't." Danielle pressed her palm against the glass. "I believe you, baby. I believe you." Later, she saw the footage, blurry, chaotic cell phone video. Marcus standing still with his hands raised, surrounded by two officers. One of them, the taller one, grabbed him. Marcus flinched, and in that second, the officer slammed him to the ground. That officer was Sergeant Mark Ellison. The charge? Resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. It was a lie. Danielle spent nights replaying that video, every frame, every angle. She barely slept. Her paycheck went straight into lawyer fees and court documents. She started skipping meals to make sure Marcus could eat right and keep up in school. Her neighbors would say, "You're strong, Danielle. You got this." She'd smile politely and nod, but inside she was running on fumes. Still, something in her refused to quit. She gathered every piece of evidence she could, statements, videos, even a witness report from a college student who'd been filming nearby. She knew this case wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about proving that the truth could still matter, even when people tried to bury it. And so, when the hearing date came, Danielle walked into that courthouse not as a victim, but as a mother on a mission. But what Danielle didn't know was that justice isn't always blind. Sometimes it looks you right in the eye and dares you to fight back. That protest had started like any other weekend event in downtown Savannah, Georgia. Families, students, and teachers filled the park across from City Hall. People were handing out water bottles, someone was playing a snare drum, and the crowd chanted phrases about fairness and reform. There was tension, sure, but nothing violent, until the police arrived in formation. Marcus was standing near the fountain with his friend Tobias, recording on his phone. "Man, we're fine," Tobias said, trying to keep calm. "They just want us to move back." Marcus nodded, hands raised slightly. "We're peaceful, sir," he called out as officers moved in closer. That's when Sergeant Mark Ellison stepped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, with a trimmed beard and mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. He barked orders, his tone sharp, impatient. "Back it up. Move away from the steps." "We're not even on the steps," Marcus said softly, his voice barely audible over the noise. Ellison didn't like that. Witnesses later said he moved toward Marcus fast. Too fast. He grabbed the teenager by the shoulder. Marcus flinched, instinctively stepping back. That single movement was enough. Ellison twisted his arm, shoved him to the ground, and pressed a knee into his back. Phones came out instantly. People were yelling, "He's just a kid!" He didn't do anything. Someone shouted for Ellison to stop, but he didn't listen. Another officer joined in, cuffing Marcus while he cried out, "I'm not fighting. Please, I'm not fighting." Danielle didn't see it happen live. She found out through a phone call from Tobias. His voice was shaking. "Miss Mercer, they took Marcus. The police, they slammed him, said he resisted, but he didn't. I swear, he didn't." By the time she reached the station, Marcus had a split lip, bruised wrists, and a charge sheet that looked like it was written to cover a mistake. Danielle looked at the paperwork in disbelief. Resisting arrest? Disorderly conduct? For standing still? She asked the desk sergeant. "Ma'am," he replied flatly, not even meeting her eyes, "your son was part of an unlawful assembly." "Unlawful," she snapped. "They had a permit." He shrugged. "Take it up with the court." That night, Danielle sat in her car outside the jail. She could still hear her son's voice through the phone. Shaky, broken, confused. "Mama, I didn't do anything wrong. I know, baby," she whispered. "And we're gonna prove it." She cried there in the driver's seat, engine off, the darkness outside pressing against the windows. But after that, something hardened in her. She wasn't going to beg anyone for fairness. She was going to fight for it. The next morning, she called attorney Greg Langford, a local defense lawyer known for taking tough cases. He'd seen hundreds of arrests like this before, young people accused of resisting when all they did was speak up. "Ms. Mercer," he said, sliding the file across his desk, "I've seen this officer's name come up more than once, but if we're going to win, we'll need witnesses, footage, everything." Danielle leaned forward. "I've got all of that." For the next few weeks, she turned her home into a war room. Folders, flash drives, printouts, all spread across the kitchen table. Marcus helped between schoolwork and appointments with their lawyer. It became their new normal, research by night, hope by morning. Still, Danielle couldn't shake the image of that officer. His expression, the way he looked down at her son like he wasn't even human. It wasn't just about the arrest anymore. It was about what it said, about who people listened to, and who they didn't. But as the court date drew closer, Danielle didn't realize that the same man who slammed her son would soon stand across from her, in the very room where she hoped for justice. The weeks leading up to the hearing were some of the hardest of Danielle's life. The house felt quieter than usual. Even the walls seemed to absorb the tension. Marcus barely spoke during dinner anymore. He'd sit there pushing peas around his plate, his appetite gone. Danielle tried to stay strong, but every time she looked at her son's wrists, the faint marks still visible from the cuffs, her stomach twisted. Late at night, she'd sit at the kitchen table with papers spread out everywhere, statements, printouts, screenshots. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Her phone buzzed. It was Greg Langford, her lawyer. "Danielle," he said, "we've got a solid case. The video evidence helps, but you know how this goes. They'll try to paint Marcus as aggressive. You need to be ready." She took a deep breath. "I'm ready. I just want them to see the truth." Greg sighed. "Truth doesn't always win in court, but credibility does. Keep calm. No matter what happens, don't let them push you into reacting." Danielle's lips tightened. "That's easy to say, Greg. You're not the one looking at the man who hurt your child." There was a pause, then his voice softened. "I know. But if you lose your composure, they'll use it against you. You can't let them see you angry. You have to show them strength." She hung up, staring at her reflection in the dark window. "Strength," she whispered. "I've been strong my whole life." That weekend, she took Marcus to the park, the same one where he used to feed ducks as a kid. They sat by the water, quiet for a while. Then Marcus finally spoke. "Mom, what if they don't believe me?" Danielle looked at him. "Then we'll make them." He blinked, tears forming. "It's not fair." "I know." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "But fairness isn't given, baby. You demand it. You fight for it with truth and patience. And sometimes you throw a little grace in there too." He laughed through the tears. "Grace, huh? You got that from church." "Maybe," she smiled, "but I mean it." That moment stuck with her. In the days that followed, Danielle practiced her statement for the court. She stood in front of the mirror, reading aloud the same paragraph again and again. Her voice had to sound steady, not bitter, not emotional, just firm. When the morning of the hearing finally came, she dressed carefully. Navy blazer, white blouse, hair tied back neatly. She looked in the mirror one last time before leaving. Her eyes were tired but focused. Marcus stood by the door, holding her hand for a moment longer than usual. "You got this, Mom." "I know," she said softly. "But if I don't, we still stand tall." As they stepped outside, the air was cool, heavy with the kind of quiet that feels like something big is about to happen. Danielle didn't say it out loud, but she knew. This wasn't just about one case. This was about being seen, being heard, and not letting fear rewrite the story. But what Danielle didn't expect was how far that courtroom would push her patience, or how easily one man's pride could turn justice into chaos. The courthouse in Macon, Georgia looked more like an old library than a place where people's lives were decided. Tall windows, wooden benches, and the faint smell of floor polish filled the air. Danielle arrived early that morning, her folder of documents clutched to her chest. She wasn't nervous, at least that's what she told herself, but her hands said otherwise. Marcus sat beside her, dressed in a simple collared shirt, his eyes darting around the room. On the other side of the aisle sat Sergeant Mark Ellison, the man who'd arrested him. He was in uniform, chest puffed out, speaking quietly to another officer. Every time Danielle glanced up, she caught him looking at her with that same smug expression, the one she'd seen in the video. The judge, Honorable William Hayes, entered. "Court is now in session," he announced, his voice echoing across the room. Everyone rose, then sat back down as he adjusted his glasses and looked over the docket. Attorney Greg Langford leaned toward Danielle. "Remember, calm and clear. Just tell the truth." She nodded. "Always." The first few testimonies were standard. Officers spoke in rehearsed tones, their stories aligned too neatly. According to them, Marcus had been non-compliant and verbally aggressive. Greg objected twice, pointing out inconsistencies, but the officers stuck to their script. When it was Danielle's turn to take the stand, the air shifted. She took her oath, straightened her blazer, and faced the courtroom. "Mrs. Mercer," Greg began, "can you describe what you saw in the footage of your son's arrest?" Her voice was steady. I saw my son doing exactly what he was told. Hands up, no yelling, no pushing. And then I saw an officer grab him without warning. Was that officer present in court today? She looked directly at Ellison. Yes, right there, Ellison didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Greg continued, and to your knowledge, did Marcus at any point resist arrest? No, she said firmly. He didn't. He was terrified. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Mercer, he said, pacing slowly, you weren't at the protest when this happened, correct? No, I wasn't. So your account relies solely on video evidence? Yes, and the video doesn't lie. The prosecutor smiled thinly. Sometimes videos don't show everything. Perhaps your son said something off camera that provoked the officer? Danielle frowned. My son's words don't justify violence. Nothing he could have said would. There was a murmur from the back of the courtroom. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Please keep your answers short, Mrs. Mercer. She leaned forward slightly. I'll keep them honest. A few people chuckled quietly. Even the judge looked up from his notes. When her testimony ended, she stepped down from the stand. As she passed by Ellison's table, he muttered something under his breath, low but sharp. Danielle turned her head slightly. What was that? She asked. He smirked. You people always play the victim. Her jaw clenched. Excuse me? The bailiff quickly stepped between them, but the damage was done. The moment was tense, the air heavy. The judge called for a brief recess. Danielle sat back beside Marcus, trying to calm her breathing. He's baiting you, Greg whispered. Don't let him get to you. But Ellison's words stuck like thorns. You people. It replayed in her head over and over, each repetition sharper than the last. When the court resumed, Ellison took the stand. He spoke confidently, his tone clipped and official. The suspect was resisting. I followed procedure Greg showed the video. The courtroom watched in silence. It was clear Marcus wasn't fighting back, but Ellison didn't budge. The camera doesn't show the whole scene, he insisted. Danielle could barely keep still. Her fists tightened in her lap. The judge adjourned the session for the day, announcing that closing statements would continue the next morning. As everyone stood, Ellison brushed past Danielle, bumping her shoulder slightly. Watch yourself, he muttered. She turned, eyes cold. You already tried that once. But what neither of them knew was that the next morning, that quiet tension would explode into something no one could have predicted. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The kind of heavy quiet that creeps in before a storm. Reporters were already outside the doors, cameras pointed at the entrance. Danielle arrived early, alone this time. Marcus stayed home. She didn't want him to see any more than he already had. Inside, Sergeant Mark Ellison stood near the witness table, arms folded, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He had that look of someone who thought the outcome was already written in his favor. Judge Hayes entered, gavel in hand. We're continuing the hearing of Marcus Mercer versus the state, he said. Let's proceed. The room filled with murmurs, then silence. Greg Langford started strong, his voice measured and confident. Your Honor, the footage clearly shows excessive force. The officer escalated the situation, not the suspect. What's more, the arresting officer's previous record includes 3 complaints of unnecessary aggression. A flicker of irritation passed across Ellison's face. The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed the point. Ellison whispered something to the officer beside him, smirking again. Danielle caught it. She'd seen that expression before, the same smug grin in the video when Marcus was on the ground. Her pulse quickened. Greg sat down, and Ellison was called back to the stand. He adjusted the microphone. Ma'am, the prosecutor said, can you describe what happened at the protest? Ellison leaned forward. Yes, sir. The crowd was unruly. Individuals refused to disperse when instructed. The suspect, Marcus Mercer, was being loud and defiant. When I approached him, he resisted. I followed training procedures to restrain him. Greg stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The video clearly shows Marcus calm and stationary. The judge motioned for the video to be played again. On screen, Marcus was shown standing quietly, his hands up. Then Ellison rushed forward, grabbed him, and slammed him down. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Ellison broke it. Videos can be misleading. You don't see what I saw. Greg crossed his arms. What exactly did you see, Sergeant? Ellison hesitated. I saw aggression. Danielle couldn't take it anymore. She whispered under her breath, "You saw a child." Ellison looked at her. "Excuse me?" Judge Hayes glanced up. "Mrs. Mercer, please refrain from interrupting." She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." But her gaze stayed locked on Ellison. The prosecutor wrapped up the questioning, and the judge called for closing remarks. Greg stood, giving a final, powerful statement about truth and accountability. The prosecutor countered with one about law and order. The tension was thick. As court adjourned, everyone stood to leave. That's when it happened. Ellison, walking past Danielle, muttered again, "Guess some people just don't know how to raise a man." She turned sharply. "What did you just say?" He stepped closer, his tone low, mocking. "You heard me." Greg stepped between them. "Sergeant, back off." But Ellison ignored him. "Always playing the victim card. Maybe if your son—" He didn't finish. Danielle took one step forward, tears burning behind her eyes. "Don't you dare talk about my child." He smirked again. "Or what?" The bailiff moved forward, but before he could intervene, Ellison did the unthinkable. He slapped her, hard. The sound cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. Everyone froze. The judge's gavel dropped from his hand. Danielle stumbled slightly but caught herself. Her cheeks stung, her heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else. She looked up at Ellison, who was still standing there, unashamed. Something inside her snapped, but not in anger, in clarity. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Years of judo training from college, long buried beneath work and motherhood, resurfaced like instinct. She grabbed his wrist, twisted, and used his momentum against him. In one swift motion, Ellison was airborne, then slammed flat onto his back on the marble floor. Gasps filled the room. The bailiffs rushed forward. One yelled, "Ma'am, step back!" Danielle released Ellison immediately, raising her hands. "He hit me," she said, voice calm, trembling only slightly. "He put his hands on me." The judge shouted for order, but no one was listening. Reporters were already snapping pictures. The prosecutor stood speechless. Ellison groaned on the floor, red-faced and furious. "She assaulted an officer." Greg moved between them. "He struck her first, Your Honor. Everyone saw it." The judge, visibly shaken, banged the gavel. "Enough! Both of you will be escorted out." Now security surrounded Danielle, but she didn't resist. As they guided her toward the hallway, she looked over her shoulder at Ellison. He was sitting up, stunned, humiliated. In that brief glance, she realized something. She hadn't just defended herself. She'd exposed him. The cameras had caught it all. The truth was no longer in her hands alone. As she stepped outside, the hallway erupted with reporters shouting her name. Microphones, flashing bulbs, chaos everywhere. Danielle didn't say a word. She just walked straight ahead, chin lifted, as if reclaiming a piece of herself she hadn't realized was missing. But by the time the video hit the internet that evening, the world would no longer see her as just a mother. They'd see her as a headline, a symbol, and a spark that couldn't be ignored. By the next morning, the video had already been viewed millions of times. The title alone spread like wildfire. Police officer slaps woman in court. She drops him with a judo throw. Every major outlet had it on repeat. News anchors debated whether she was justified. Talk shows broke the clip down frame by frame. Some called her a hero. Others said she crossed a line. Danielle Mercer woke up to flashing cameras outside her home. Reporters were camped out on the sidewalk, shouting questions through the morning air. She pulled her curtains shut and sank into the couch, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, texts, messages from strangers. "Danielle, are you okay?" Greg's voice came through the phone. She let out a slow breath. "I don't even know anymore. One second I'm in court, the next, I'm on TV." "They can't charge you for defending yourself," Greg said. "The footage is clear. He hit you first. But it's about to get messy. The department's already holding a press conference." "Of course they are," she muttered. Sure enough, by noon, Sergeant Ellison's statement aired on every local station. He sat stiffly beside his attorney, claiming he was provoked and struck in self-defense. The clip of him hitting her played beside his denial, making him look even more ridiculous. Still, the department didn't apologize. Not yet. That afternoon, Danielle stepped outside for the first time. The crowd outside clapped as she walked to her car. Some people called her brave. One woman held up a sign that read, "Protect our mothers." A young man with a camera approached her. Miss Mercer, what do you want people to learn from this? She stopped for a second, the wind tugging at her hair. That respect goes both ways, she said softly, and that standing up for yourself doesn't make you violent. It makes you human. Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to silence the crowd. Meanwhile, Marcus sat inside watching the coverage. Every time the video replayed, he clenched his fists tighter. They're making you out to be some kind of fighter, Mom, he said when she came back home. Like that's all you are. She sat beside him, rubbing his shoulder. Let them talk. The truth's bigger than their headlines. He looked at her. But what about me? What about you? She asked gently. I was the one arrested. But now, it's like I disappeared. Her heart broke hearing that. You didn't disappear, baby. You're the reason any of this came to light. You're the reason people are paying attention. Don't ever forget that. That night, she sat at her kitchen table again, but this time, no paperwork, just silence. The kind of silence that feels earned. Her lawyer called again later. The DA's reviewing everything. The assault charge against Ellison is being discussed. There's even talk of an internal investigation. Danielle nodded, staring at the muted TV where her own face filled the screen. I didn't want fame, she said. I just wanted fairness. I know, Greg replied quietly. And sometimes, that's how fairness finds you, kicking down the door you were knocking on. Danielle smiled faintly. Guess it kicked hard this time. But as the days went on, Danielle would realize the real battle wasn't in the courtroom anymore. It was in how she chose to carry what happened next. 2 weeks later, the world had moved on to its next outrage. But for Danielle Mercer, life hadn't gone back to normal. It had just changed shape. She sat alone one evening at the same park where she and Marcus used to feed the ducks. The air was still, the sky fading to orange over the water. Her hands rested in her lap, the bruises on her wrist, now just faint reminders of that day. She wasn't angry anymore. Not really. She was tired, but in that good kind of tired that comes when you've finally stopped holding everything in. Marcus sat down beside her quietly. They dropped the charges, he said. Greg just called. Danielle nodded, a small smile touching her lips. I figured they would. He looked out over the pond. People still talk about you. They call you the Judo mom. Danielle chuckled softly. That's a new one. Yeah, but I kinda like it. For a while they sat in silence. The world around them kept moving, families walking by, kids laughing in the distance. But between them was peace, the kind that doesn't need words. Finally, Marcus said, You know, that cop, Ellison, he's suspended now. Paid leave, but still. They're reviewing all his cases. Danielle's smile faded slightly. Good. But I don't need him to lose his badge. I just want him to understand what he did. Marcus frowned. You think he ever will? She turned to him. Maybe not. But I can't carry hate forever, Marcus. It burns the person holding it more than the one it's aimed at. He thought about that for a moment, then nodded. Besides, she continued, you can't control what people do to you. You can only control how you respond. And sometimes, the right response isn't about staying quiet or polite. It's about saying, enough. He looked at her differently then, not as the mom who packed his lunches or reminded him to do homework, but as someone who had faced something bigger and refused to bend. Later that night, back home, Danielle watched the news replay the clip one last time, not because she wanted to relive it, but because she needed to see it for what it was. Not an act of anger, not rebellion, just a moment when she refused to be treated as less. She turned off the TV, exhaled deeply, and whispered to herself, never again. She walked to her son's room, peeked in, and smiled. He was asleep, his sketchbook open on his chest, a drawing of her mid-motion, the throw captured perfectly, like a symbol of something neither of them could quite put into words. And maybe that's what this story really was about. Not revenge, not humiliation, but balance. Knowing when to stand firm and when to move with what's thrown at you. Because sometimes standing up for yourself isn't about fighting. It's about refusing to fall. So if you're watching this right now, take a page from Danielle Mercer's story. Stand tall, protect your peace. And when life pushes too hard, remember, you have every right to push back. But not out of rage, out of respect for yourself.